Okay, so tonight we're going to talk about the causes of World War II, and that's objective number 8, so you can number this part of the notes, number 8. So our acronym to remember the causes of World War II is G-flat. You might remember the causes of World War I are mania, and causes of World War II are G-flat, the first of which being Great Depression. So you can fill these in along the left-hand side. We're going to define each of them. So the Great Depression is one of the causes, as well as fascism. The League of Nations, which you remember was created at the end of World War I. Appeasement, which we will go over in class tomorrow. And Treaty of Versailles, which again was our treaty that ended World War I. If you're not done writing, you might want to pause. So the first cause was the Great Depression. The Great Depression, as you learned in class, was not just an American phenomenon, but it was a global phenomenon. At this point, the world is so economically intertwined, not as much as it is today, but still to an extent that if the Great Depression or a stock market crash happened in the United States, it will have effects on other countries that are trading partners. And so this added financial strain on Germany and helped Hitler rise to power. It put Germany in such a low place that an inspirational speaker or promising leader like Hitler seemed like a beacon of hope for its people. And also, the U.S. was distracted. It had to deal with its own economic problems, so we adopted, again, a policy of isolation. This was our policy going into World War I and prior to World War I, which is why it took us so long to get involved. And so because of the Great Depression, the U.S. adopted this policy once again. We needed to focus inwards. Fascism is our second cause. And so fascism attacked weakness of democracy and corruption of capitalism. It was very anti-West. Especially combined with the Great Depression, it was easy for fascism to rise because capitalism looked weak. It looked like a failure since the stock markets were able to crash and the economies collapsed. Fascism promised vigorous foreign and military programs. So as we talked about in class, fascism is always accompanied by war of some sort. And so this meant building up your military so that you could conquer or go to war. So Mussolini was in Italy and expanding into Ethiopia and Africa. You will see, or you did see in your DBQ, a battle with the Italians and Ethiopians. However, Ethiopia was one of the only regions that was not able to be colonized. And then Germany expanded into Czechoslovakia, which we'll get into with our appeasement this week, and into Austria, and we'll later push into Poland. So in a fascist government, you have state control of economy, which reinforces the power of the fascist party. So in class, we talked about fascist governments usually having a socialist type economy because the government does like to have more control. And so it gives more power to the party versus to private businesses. Fascism gained strength in Germany, Italy, and Spain. Spain doesn't get involved in World War II. They're just coming out of a civil war. However, Franco is able to take power thanks to the help of Hitler. And so we have 3 fascist states in Europe. There's not a perfect definition for fascism, but it's a strict government with complete control, a conservative government that results in a dictator, that uses war and scapegoating, or targets a certain population of its own people to assert its power. Fascism also relies heavily on nationalism. So, like you may have learned, Hitler tried to create a strong sense of national identity, and it did not involve the Jews or communists. In fact, it scapegoated them. So that's what fascism looks like. Our next cause of World War II is the League of Nations, which again was intended to keep the peace after World War I. So it had it's an international and diplomatic peace organization that Will came up with during the Treaty of Versailles after World War I, but you might remember that the U.S. did not join. And that was a great weakness. We saw a political cartoon where the League of Nations was a fire truck and it was missing a wheel. The United States had one of its wheels. Pardon me, but the intention was to build transparency and communication among the countries. And so the League of Nations is basically impotent or does not function. It does nothing to check the aggressive actions of Japan or Germany or Italy. It sort of just sits by. So this cartoon, take a look. You see the League of Nations. Inside are all the members of the League of Nations. Outside is a fire and a guy that looks very much like Hitler with some gasoline. And the quote is, "It worked at the Reichstag. Why not here?" So you might remember from our video on Friday that the Reichstag, which is the German government building, burned down, and the Nazi Party blamed it on the communists. However, Hitler's right-hand man, Goebbels, had an apartment that had an underground path straight to the Reichstag. So if anyone probably burned it down, it was the Nazis themselves in an effort to scapegoat the communists. So where is the peacekeeping? It's not happening. Next, we have appeasement. So here we see a picture of Hitler and some of our British and French officials. So there was a conference in Munich at which Britain and France allowed Hitler to take the Sudetenland, which is part of Czechoslovakia. It was home to many ethnic Germans, and the intention was, we do not want to go to war again. After the damage that was done and the mass destruction and loss of people in World War I, all the European nations, aside from Germany, were very, very hesitant to go to war again and willing to do almost anything to avoid it. And so Britain and France sort of convinced themselves, even though they probably knew it wasn't true, that if they appeased Hitler and gave him what he wanted, or what he said he wanted, which was a part of Czechoslovakia, that he would be satisfied and stop wanting. We know from, because hindsight is 20/20, that that was 100% not true. Hitler also knew all along that it was not true. So why would these powers appease Hitler? They wanted to avoid another war. They are still hurting and struggling from World War I. Remember, the Great Depression is going on, and these Britain and France are poor and worried about their own economies. So they thought they could satisfy Hitler by giving him the Sudetenland. They were very, very wrong. So there you see Hitler signing the agreement at the Munich conference that would give him part of Czechoslovakia. The last cause is the Treaty of Versailles. So there we see our Treaty of Peace that was at Versailles in Paris. This is the time the Germans were snuck in through the maids' quarters and made to stand the entire time. It was a huge embarrassment for them. And this is the original cause where huge mistakes were made. And again, I just want to remind that Wilson was very against over-punishment of Germany, but it happened anyways because George Clemenceau of France was determined to get revenge. So Germany was punished so harshly that they were left in ruins. They could not bounce back, their economy was broken, and then the Depression happens on top of it. So this created the perfect situation for the rise of Hitler. He promised to fix the state of Germany. He said that any German leaders that accepted the Treaty of Paris, that called for reparations and disarmament, etc., were cowards, that they were enemies of Germany. And so as soon as Hitler took power, he stopped agreeing to the Treaty of Versailles. He turned his back on it and said that anyone who accepted it was not a nationalist. They were anti-German. So the League of Nations, again, from the Treaty of Versailles, was not powerful enough to prevent future conflicts. And the U.S. didn't join. Essentially, the organization that was meant to create peace did absolutely nothing. So Nazi aggression is usually considered the start of World War II, but I want to propose maybe some ideas that would challenge that concept. On the left here we have the Nazi flag, and on the right we have the Japanese rising sun flag. For the record, Japan believes it's the nation of the rising sun, meaning it's on the rise and it will have its day. So the Japanese actually in China invade China from Manchuria in 1937. This should sound familiar from the Communist or Chinese Revolution with Mao. So while some Japanese leaders voiced concern about this invasion, they were quieted by threats of assassination, intense patriotic solidarity. So you were not supposed to be anti the war because then you were anti the soldiers. And everyone knows you cannot be anti-soldier. So as the Chinese resistance stiffened, this would be Mao's soldiers, Japanese soldiers took out their frustration on Chinese soldiers and civilians. We read that DBQ in which Chinese peasants were poorly, drastically mistreated by the Japanese. So the most famous example is the capture of Nanking, where thousands or hundreds of thousands of citizens and soldiers were killed and tens of thousands of women were assaulted. So this needless killing. This also prompted the U.S. to try to get involved and offer aid. We offered aid to Chiang Kai-shek because we did not want Mao to get power, but either way. It drew in other outside participants into this conflict. And then we have Nazi aggression. Hitler annexes Austria and Czech and then turns to the east towards France and Belgium, etc. And so the appeasement did not quite work. So in 1939, Hitler and Stalin sign a non-aggression pact. They agree they will not invade one another. Poland is between Germany and Russia, but still both leaders, especially Hitler, knows that they can't deal with each other right now. So Hitler wants to be able to go on a conquering spree, and in fact, he fully intends to break this non-aggression pact, but he doesn't want Russia to act too soon before he's ready. So he needs some time of peace with Russia while he can build up his arms and conquer certain important territories. Then he will turn to Russia. And Stalin actually expects this to be the case all the time, but he could use some more time as well, so he signs the non-aggression pact. And this is definitely the tone portrayed in the political cartoon, if you take a look. Poland is lying between them. So Poland is dividing the two powers, and they're both greeting each other in sort of a friendly but definitely not trusting tone. So they're being civil, but there's a lot of undertones there. So Hitler had, again, no plans to honor this pact, and Stalin had no delusions that Hitler would not invade. So they both knew that this pact was kind of a bunch of baloney, but they signed it because it was in their both their best interest for the time being. Okay, that is all. Hope you have a good night, and we'll see you tomorrow.